Yes, what's happening everyone? It's Reagan Cypher here. I'm finally back after a summer break that felt like forever with a long awaited and belated review of the Soundbeats Air 4. Those who've been following the channel for a while know I love a semi-in earbud, and the top of the tree when it comes to those budget buds had previously been Soundbeats Air 3 Deluxe HS. Today we're going to be taking a look at the merits of both, seeing some of those tweaks which Soundbeats have made to the Air 4 and judging whether it's worth the extra money. Now Soundbeats love to keep us on our toes. They've released two models of the Air 4 range at the same time, the standard Air 4 and the Lite. The standard is the one with the real headline features, a lot of which you wouldn't expect to find in a semi-in earbud which costs around the £50 mark. Controversially, one of those is active noise cancellation, which we certainly don't see very often in buds of this form factor. And since they're using the same QCC 3071 Qualcomm chipset which Earfun used in their rather disappointing Air Pro 3, they're giving you a bunch of different Qualcomm codecs, including aptX lossless, as part of that Snapdragon Sound suite of features, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the audio and sound signature section. Another headline feature is multi-point connectivity, i.e. the ability to be connected to two simultaneous devices and seamlessly switch between the two as and when you need them. Super low latency, one of the lowest latency performers of any of Soundbeats' previous releases, and an increased total battery life of 26 hours compared to 20 on the Air 3 Deluxe HS and 17 on the Air 3. So on paper, quite a lot to be excited about, but how would that translate into real life performance? Let's kick on with the review and jump straight into the unboxing. Now, since the Air 3 Deluxe HS was released, feels like an eternity ago now, Soundbeats have been edging the professionalism and premiumness of their unboxing experience upwards a notch with almost every release, and the Air 4 thus follow the Engine 4 and Wings 2 with a smart outer enclosure that's now punching above the lower mid-range price point at which Soundbeats typically operate. All the documentation is now held in a smart little envelope with a thumb pull that allows you to very easily get it out of the box. There's a quick guide on how to download and use the app and an instruction manual. Both are in 7 different languages. The charge case on the Air 4 is instantly recognizable as being from the Soundbeats stable. It has the same matte mono two-tone look as the case of the Capsule 3 Pro, which we reviewed here a few months ago now, and it also shares the same rose gold accents on the back and at the USB-C socket. It has a small pairing and reset button right here on the front. It's quite difficult to see, but it's a lot easier to see than that tiny button which was on the base of the Capsule 3 Pro case, and as such it's a little bit easier to use. The LED on the case at the front seems to be the same as the one which is used on the case of the Life. It's actually a little bit of a disappointment because it's rather dim and difficult to see even in well lit rooms, but it does the job, letting you know when the case battery is dropping, staying green until it drops below 50%, where it turns amber until you've got below 10%, and then it turns red. Like most Soundbeats cases, it's certainly functional, but whether it's built to last the test of time is a different question. Even so, I've had it in my bag, in my suitcase, I've taken it abroad, it's been covered in sun cream, and even so, it's still in pretty good condition. I think it's stood the test of time so far a little bit better than the Capsule 3 Pro case, which seemed to scuff up in my pocket quite quickly. And certainly compared to the glossy plastic case of the Air 3 Deluxe HS, it does feel a little bit more robust. The hinge basically has 2 locations, open and shut. Open the case and Hall switch mode will immediately trigger pairing or connection to your last known device. It's actually quite a nice case to use. It's got quite a satisfying snap when you flip the lid open, and you can use it single-handedly, although quite how you kind of bend your fingers to get the buds out, I'm not really sure. So in terms of the build quality and ergonomics, it's evolution rather than revolution. If you've used the Air 3 Deluxe HS or any of the Air 3 series previously, it's not going to look a whole lot different to you, but there are some subtle differences, in particular in terms of the stability. Now, if you previously looked at or even owned the Apple AirPods and you've seen how they changed the ergonomics from the AirPod Gen 2 to the Gen 3. This change from Soundbeats isn't going to look particularly imaginative. The tip of the lollipop, for want of a better analogy, is a little bit larger, and this, combined with the wider neck, is designed to give you more stability. I'm not sure I would go out for a run and exercise with the Air 4, but I feel much more comfortable with the Air 4 than the Air 3 design. I can take them out for a walk, or if I need to go and run for the train because I'm late, something like that, well, I can do that safe in the knowledge that they're not going to drop out of my ears. And they passed the shake test with flying colours as well, so I wouldn't completely rule out working out with them. Another change is the driver surround, which is now a metallic bronze colour, and they've removed the sharp lip around the outside of it as well, so that does give the comfort a marginal improvement. And one of the minor complaints I had with the Air 3 Deluxe HS was the touch control area. It's in the worst possible place because it's kind of where you want to adjust the bud, so you would find yourself triggering quite a few accidental touches. I'd like to say Soundbeats have listened and changed it, but they haven't. In fact, they've made the touch control area even bigger. Otherwise, the stem lengths are still the same at around 33mm. There's some other minor changes, like the area inside your ear is shiny rather than matte now, but these don't really make much difference in the grand scheme of things. It's a very minor tweak, but it has improved the ergonomics. Like with all Soundbeats ANC models, you don't have the ability to cycle tracks back. Holding down the left bud as opposed to the right bud, which cycles your tracks forward, instead initiates active noise cancellation. A lot of people have a gripe with this, and an area which Soundbeats keep ignoring, and I'm not really sure why, is the ability to customize controls within the app. When you buy even budget products like QCY or Baseus, you've got the ability to change those controls within the app so they suit your preferred control scheme. I've mentioned it a few times that Soundbeats should be looking to integrate this, because it really isn't so much as a nice to have feature as more an expected feature nowadays. So this is definitely an area where Soundbeats really have to stay in touch with the rest of the market on future releases. It is possible to use the Air 4 in single mode. You'll get stereo through the one bud, and the earbuds automatically shut down after 3 minutes of inactivity. And now we move on to the audio and sound signature. They're using a large dynamic driver, 13mm this time around rather than the 14.2mm used in the Air 3. And Soundbeats, instead of using the Wookiee chip, which they've used quite successfully throughout a lot of their HS models through 2023, they've gone back to using Qualcomm and the flagship Qualcomm chipset of the moment, the QCC3071. So with the Air 4, you're getting a bunch of different Qualcomm codecs, including aptX Lossless and aptX Adaptive. I talked about the capabilities of aptX Adaptive in previous releases. aptX Lossless isn't strictly speaking lossless, although it does give you a hefty improvement over the total transmission that you would get with LDAC, for example, and it's a more efficient codec as well. LDAC is probably supported by a wider variety of phones, but if you own a Snapdragon phone, then it's likely that your phone is at least going to support one of those two codecs, although it's only really Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and above phones which support the aptX Lossless, so it's very unlikely you're going to get the full benefit. What does this mean in real life? Actually, not a great deal. To make the most of these high bit rates, you need to get the fundamentals right as well. So if you haven't got a huge amount of difference in the driver and the tuning, a badly tuned bud is still going to sound bad regardless of whether it's lossless or not. And whilst the Air 4 certainly doesn't sound bad, I feel like this was an opportunity to maybe improve the audio further in their flagship range, but instead it feels like Soundbeats have gone for features over maximum audio quality, and as a result you're not getting a huge difference between this model and the Air 3 Deluxe HS other than the tuning. And one of the problems with the Air 3 Deluxe HS was the slightly constrained mid-range. It was a quite balanced sounding earbud, and it certainly deviated from the previous Air 3 sound, which was quite punchy and quite raw. The Deluxe HS sounded a little bit more smooth. This time around with the Air 4, it seems like they found a halfway house between the two. Whether it translates as a better sound as such is definitely open to interpretation. In those mid-ranges, you've got a huge peak and then drop between 1 and 2.5K before a gradual climb up to around 4K, which sustains up to 7K before another sharp drop. With the lower frequencies boosted as well, I think the idea here was just to give the sound signature a little bit more punch and make it more reminiscent of the original Air 3, making the bass fuller and giving more attack to instruments and percussion. And it kind of works most of the time, but when it doesn't, it does sound a little bit imbalanced, and you're left with a slightly awkward sound that is really in desperate need of some adjustments. I'll come back to that mid-range, where you've got male vocals, where the vocal range can extend to a little bit higher, someone like Mick Hucknall from Simply Red. The vocal at times can come in really overpowering and fatiguing. Contrast that with baritone vocals, the likes of Lenny Kravitz, John Legend, 80s vocalists, Kurt Smith from Tears for Fears, or if you like opera, tenors as well. These sound a little bit better. It's those higher vocals which can come through sounding really sharp and shrill. It's those transient ranges in vocals in particular which cause problems for the Air 4. However, if you like more simple arrangements, house, techno, etc., where there's not too much complexity in the track, then the Air 4's strengths really do complement these music styles quite well. The bass is tuned differently on the Air 4. I wouldn't necessarily say that it's stronger throughout the whole lower frequency. It's a little bit less controlled than the Air 3 Deluxe HS. The sub bass is probably boosted a little bit as well. Kick drums can sound energetic, and like I said, it does translate to these music styles quite well. Now, I've included my own custom EQ setting, which I felt brought much more out of the performance of the buds. It isn't as energetic as the Soundbeats Classic sound signature, but it's more balanced, and I found that this was much more palatable across each different music genre. It takes some of the inconsistencies out of the treble, and it trims a little fat out of the bass. So let me know what you think in the comment section below, but from my perspective, it definitely brought a little bit more out of the Air 4. And before we go into detail on active noise cancellation, I should probably say at this point, do not, whatever you do, switch it off, because it completely kills the sound signature. For whatever reason, active noise cancellation does bring complexity into tuning the drivers, because there's such a massive drop off, certainly in the lower frequencies. This chasmic difference with a lot of the earbuds which I've tested, but none more so than the Air 4, where it becomes pretty much unusable with active noise cancellation switched off. And that does present its own challenges when it comes to stuff like battery life, which we'll talk about later on in the review. But what about the active noise cancellation? Well, being late to the party on the review of the Air 4, I have had the opportunity to watch some other reviewers' thoughts on the ANC, and I'm quite surprised how negative some of the thoughts have been. Now, I realise that reviewers have to cater to the full spectrum of potential consumers, from beginners who maybe don't understand that the form factor would be a constraint in terms of noise reduction, all the way through to die-hard enthusiasts like we are. But even so, I'm still surprised at some people saying that the active noise cancellation is non-existent. Of course, those higher frequency sounds like conversations going on around you and kids screaming, they're not going to be negated. It's in those lower frequency sounds and those nearby sounds. So for those of us who are slightly sensitive to hearing, maybe you've got the fans of a computer while you're working at home, air conditioning in another room, or if you're sat by the window like I am here and you've got the sound of traffic going on outside, then it takes a little bit of the edge off those sounds. And for me, I think this is definitely worthwhile, as long as you go in with that mindset and that ANC is an added bonus, rather than you're comparing it to a Bose or a Sony or even a mid-tier Soundbeats, Soundcore or a QCY bud. ANC could be a benefit to you on this model. I compare it to something like the Samsung Galaxy Buds Live, which had this feature advertised previously, and I noticed absolutely no noise reduction whatsoever. As soon as you put the Air 4 in your ear, you notice some noise reduction immediately. I couldn't say that for the Samsung Galaxy Buds Live. I never ever noticed ANC working on that model whatsoever, so it's definitely an improvement on that. And now it's time to test how the call quality sounds on the Air 4. We're going to take you through a number of different scenarios, the first of which is indoors in absolute silence.
What we're trying to represent here is how your voice is going to sound on your calls when you're making or taking an important call, interview, something like that, where you've been able to reduce all of the sounds around you. And what we're looking for here is the weight, the tone, and the clarity of your voice. And this is how the Soundpeats Air4 perform when you're making or taking a call in a busy indoor environment. So I think have quietened down a little bit. We've got some background noise going on. We're in a coffee shop, so you've got the sounds of people walking around and clattering or whatever it is going on in the kitchen, people making coffees, etc. If you want to hear how the Air 4 sounds in comparison to the Air 3 and the Air 3 Deluxe HS, do check out my 2023 Call Quality Test. I haven't heard how they perform in this busy indoor environment yet. So I'm really interested to compare them and see how it sounds. And this time we're testing the Soundpeats Air 4 in an outdoor environment. I'm on a roundabout in a reasonably busy town, so we've got a little bit of wind noise coming through. We've got the noise of traffic, different vehicles coming by. This is how you can expect the Air 4 to sound when you're using them out and about or on the daily commute.
So as you heard there, a little bit of a mixed bag when it comes to call quality. When you're in a really busy scene and a static busy scene, like we saw in the coffee shop for example, it handled that noise reduction really well. The algorithm does seem a little bit too aggressive though, so even when you're in a very quiet scene, your voice could just sound a little bit too soft. Whilst your voice has good weight and tone, the clarity isn't great, so really a mixed bag. And if you're mostly out and about when you're taking your calls, then probably the Air 4 is going to represent a big improvement over something like the Air 3, which would let through a lot of background noise, although your own voice was a little bit sharper. Now in terms of the features, having that Qualcomm chipset gives you a lot of features native to it, which Soundpeats have mostly implemented, although they've left a few off that the chip is capable of, such as LE audio. This might come in a future firmware update. Now the Bluetooth version is 5.3 and I found the stability to be excellent. So a few people complaining about stability on the Air 3 Deluxe HS. I never had any issues with it, but the Air 4 in particular seems even more stable. I was able to increase the distance from source to device to around 15 meters before you started to notice the signal degrading. You're getting a host of codecs: aptX lossless, aptX adaptive, AAC and SBC. And the newer aptX codecs are all geared up to give you maximum efficiency possible. And with the aptX adaptive codec, I was getting tremendous performance on latency, one of the best which I've tested, and comparable to, in fact probably better than the Air 3 Pro, which was their previously top performing, and also a Qualcomm chipset TWS. So it seems that with these Qualcomm chips, Soundpeats is definitely able to offer slightly better latency performance. And in terms of lip synchronization, that was outstanding, especially with gaming mode activated, where you're reducing that latency even further. The multi-point is adequate, although it is a little bit of a faff to set it up. You have to connect to one device and then turn the Bluetooth off on that, or disconnect, and then add it with the other device. Certainly if you don't easily have access to switch the Bluetooth off on your first device, then that can make it a little bit of an ordeal. Compared with something like the Oppo Enco X2, which has a really nice multi-point configuration where you can pretty much just set the two up without having to switch anything off or disconnect through the Hey Melody app, give you the facility to be able to see which devices are connected. Unfortunately, you don't have this with the Soundpeats app, and that can make it a little bit frustrating at times. To use it, you have to pause the audio playback on your primary device, and then the secondary device will kick in. And that handshake didn't take too long. It was over within a couple of seconds, whereas I know some of their other models have been much longer. I didn't have that problem on the Air 4. However, if you then pause the secondary device, then the primary device doesn't return to playback, and even if you press play on the primary device again, audio doesn't come through. So it's still a little bit problematic, and it's not as seamless as it would maybe have you believe in the marketing material. And there are a few other features which the Air 4 lack, which I would have to say are a little bit disappointing. There's no quick charge, you have to wait the full sort of 90 to 120 minutes. There's no wireless charging either. That's not really a problem for me and certainly not expected at this price range. But what I do perhaps expect is customizable controls through the app. And there's no option for spatial audio either, which is maybe a nice to have, but we have already seen it start to be implemented in some of their lower cost competitors' alternatives such as the Oppo Enco Air 3. And maybe in-ear detection as well, which they took away because it was slightly problematic on the Air 3 Deluxe HS. These two features aren't really a big problem for me, but if they are to you, then it's worth bearing in mind that you don't have them. And these lack of features leave the app feeling a little bit bare. You can toggle ANC mode, but it's only really on or off. You've got a custom equalizer which gives you a 10 band as you saw in the audio section. You've got a bunch of different presets, you can toggle gaming mode, and you can turn touch controls off. Apart from that, the only other thing is adaptive EQ, which we've seen a few times before, and that doesn't really work either. Now moving on to battery life, and this is where the active noise cancellation takes the shine off the potential for battery life on this model. Like we said previously, you wouldn't really want to use this model without ANC on. So the figure of 6.5 hours with 26 hours with the case is a nice headline, but in reality you're not going to get that. Closer to between 4 and 4.5 hours with active noise cancellation switched on. In my tests I got anything from around 4 hours 10 minutes all the way through to 4 hours and 17 minutes. So pretty middle of the road performance when you're talking about a semi-in earbud. So to summarize, let's start with the positives. Soundpeats already had a great product. They've improved that product ever so slightly. They've certainly improved the ergonomics. They've increased the stability in your ears, which is one area which I found was a little bit lacking on the Air 3. They've given you more options in terms of the codecs. They've improved the call quality slightly. And you've got that added bonus in there of active noise cancellation, which if your expectations are much higher, then prepare to be disappointed. At the same time, Soundpeats, it feels like on this occasion, have chased after some of the headline features while neglecting some of the fundamentals which they should be implementing by now, like customizable controls, quick charge, and features that if they don't match soon, they may start to lose pace with the rest of the market. And then there's the sound. Again, it feels like they've just gone after all those headline features and have lost sight of the sound a little bit, because this is something that Soundpeats were much better than the rest of the market in semi-in-ear, certainly from a budget perspective, and it made them the ideal alternative if you don't want to spend Apple money on an AirPod. But that gap has started to close a little bit. For me, for their next release, I would like to see them not focus on some of those interesting features and just focus on improving the sound even more so they can restore that gap between them and the rest of the budget market. Because even with the resurgence of some of the competition, they're still able to generate a really nice sound in a semi-in earbud. And for us semi-in-ear aficionados, that's really pretty much all we want to see. If you had the Air 3 Deluxe HS, you might see this as a little bit too much evolution rather than revolution in terms of upgrading, but from the Air 3 to the Air 4 I definitely see it as a big upgrade due to that improved case, increased battery life with the case as well, and the improved ergonomics, in particular that added stability. If you're buying a semi-in earbud for the first time and you don't have any previous Soundpeats releases, then the Air 4 is still one of the top performing budget options on the market. I've seen a wide range of views on the Air 4 from people who have used it so far on the Soundpeats and Earbuds subreddit. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts if you've already owned the Air 4 on what you think, and please do leave your comments in the comments section below. If you haven't already subscribed, please do give the video a like if you found it useful. For now, it's Reagan Cypher signing off.